What happens when two Hollywood titans collide on live television in the most explosive confrontation The View has ever witnessed? You won't believe what unfolds when legendary actor Robert De Niro sits down with the panel, only to find himself in the crosshairs of Whoopi Goldberg's wrath in a heated exchange that left viewers stunned and the studio in absolute chaos. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below. Because you're not going to believe what unfolds when one of cinema's most respected actors gets completely blindsided by what was supposed to be a routine promotional appearance. The atmosphere in the View studio was electric as Robert De Niro settled into the guest chair, his weathered face carrying that familiar intensity that has captivated audiences for decades. The lighting crew had carefully positioned the cameras to capture every angle, but no one could have anticipated they would be documenting one of the most controversial moments in daytime television history. What started as typical morning television banter quickly transformed into something far more sinister when the conversation took an unexpected political turn that would ignite the most explosive segment the show had ever aired. So Robert, you're here promoting your new film, but we can't ignore the elephant in the room. Joy Behar began with her trademark smirk, clearly setting the stage for what was about to unfold. Her eyes gleamed with the anticipation of someone who sensed potential drama brewing. You've been pretty vocal about your political views lately, and I know our audience would love to hear your thoughts on the current state of affairs. De Niro shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his weathered hands gripping the armrests as his eyes scanned the panel with the wariness of someone who had suddenly realized he might be walking into an ambush. The studio lights felt hotter than usual, and he could sense the tension building among the panelists like storm clouds gathering on the horizon. "Look, I'm here to talk about the movie," he said, his voice carrying that distinctive gravelly tone that had become synonymous with authority and authenticity. "But if you want to go there, I'm not going to back down from speaking my mind." The tension in the studio was palpable as Whoopi leaned forward in her chair, her expression already hardening with an intensity that caught everyone off guard. The other panelists exchanged nervous glances, sensing that their colleague was about to take the conversation in a direction that might be difficult to control. "Oh, we definitely want to go there, Robert," she said, her voice dripping with an edge that made the production crew behind the cameras shift uncomfortably. "Because some of us are tired of celebrities thinking they can just spout off whatever they want without consequences." The audience in the studio could feel the electricity in the air as the temperature seemed to drop several degrees. Sunny Hostin tried to interject with a diplomatic comment about respecting different viewpoints and maintaining civil discourse, but her attempt at mediation was quickly overshadowed by Whoopi's laser-focused attention on De Niro, who was clearly taken aback by the unexpectedly hostile reception. The legendary actor's jaw tightened as he realized this wasn't going to be the friendly promotional chat he had expected when he agreed to appear on the show. "I've been in this business longer than most people have been alive," De Niro responded, his voice rising slightly as his famous temper began to simmer just beneath the surface. His eyes, which had captivated audiences in countless films, now held a steely determination that suggested he wasn't about to be intimidated. "I've earned the right to express my opinions, and I'm not going to be silenced by anyone, especially not on a show that's supposed to be about open dialogue and diverse perspectives." The audience could practically feel the electricity crackling between the two entertainment veterans as Whoopi's eyes flashed with unmistakable anger. Her body language became more aggressive, leaning forward like a predator preparing to strike. "Earn the right?" she shot back, her voice becoming more confrontational with each word. "Just because you've made some movies doesn't mean you get to lecture the rest of us about how the world should work. Some of us have been fighting real battles while you've been playing pretend in front of cameras." Ana Navarro attempted to redirect the conversation towards safer ground, suggesting they focus on De Niro's extensive charitable work and humanitarian efforts, but the damage was already done. The two Hollywood veterans were now locked in an intense, staring contest that felt more like a boxing match than a television interview. De Niro's hands clenched slightly as he processed Whoopi's increasingly aggressive tone and realized that this confrontation was about to escalate beyond anything he had anticipated. Playing pretend, De Niro's voice carried a dangerous edge as he leaned forward in his chair, matching Whoopi's aggressive posture. his face flushed with indignation at the dismissive characterization of his life's work. I've used my platform to shine light on important issues while some people just sit behind desks, throwing stones at anyone who doesn't conform to their worldview. At least I'm willing to put myself out there instead of hiding behind the safety of a daytime talk show. The studio fell silent except for the barely audible gasps from the audience members, who seemed to realize they were witnessing something unprecedented. The camera operators continued filming, capturing every micro-expression and gesture as the confrontation unfolded. Whoopi's face darkened as she absorbed what felt like a direct attack on her credibility and life's work. The other panelists sat frozen in their chairs, clearly unprepared for how quickly the conversation had devolved into personal attacks. Hiding behind a talk show, Whoopi's voice rose to a level that made everyone in the studio visibly uncomfortable. The veins in her neck became visible as her anger reached new heights. I've been speaking truth to power since before you decided to become Hollywood's self-appointed political spokesman. Don't you dare sit there and act like you're some kind of brave truth-teller when you're just another privileged actor with an opinion. De Niro's legendary temper was beginning to show, as his face flushed red with indignation. His hands gripped the chair arms so tightly that his knuckles turned white. Privileged? I worked my way up from nothing, just like you did. The difference is I don't use my success as an excuse to tear down other people who are trying to make a difference in this world. The confrontation was escalating beyond what anyone in the studio could have anticipated. Sarah Haynes made a desperate attempt to change the subject by asking about De Niro's upcoming projects and his continued commitment to his craft, but both combatants were too invested in their battle to back down. The tension had reached a critical breaking point, and everyone in the studio could sense that something truly explosive was about to happen. Whoopi suddenly stood up from her chair with such force that it rolled backward, towering over the guest table with an intimidating presence that made De Niro's eyes narrow with determination. Her shadow fell across the coffee table as she positioned herself like a prosecutor addressing a hostile witness. You know what your problem is, Robert? You think because you've played tough guys on screen, you can come in here and intimidate people. But this isn't one of your movies, and I'm not impressed by your tough guy act. The legendary actor slowly rose from his own chair, matching Whoopi's aggressive posture with the measured grace of someone who had faced down real intimidation both on and off screen. The studio audience held its collective breath as the two entertainment icons faced off like gladiators in an arena. And you think because you have a platform, you can bully anyone who doesn't agree with your particular worldview. But I've faced down real bullies in my life, and you don't scare me. The studio audience was completely silent, transfixed by the unprecedented confrontation unfolding before their eyes. The cameras continued rolling as the two entertainment icons faced off in what had become a battle of wills that neither seemed willing or able to lose. The other panelists sat helplessly in their chairs, watching as their show spiraled completely out of control and into uncharted territory. The studio's atmosphere had shifted from uncomfortable tension to outright hostility as both De Niro and Whoopi remained standing, their confrontation having crossed into uncharted territory for daytime television. The production crew behind the cameras frantically debated whether to cut to commercial, but the raw drama unfolding was too compelling and potentially ratings-worthy to interrupt. The air conditioning seemed inadequate against the heat generated by the escalating conflict. You want to talk about bullies? Whoopi's voice carried a venom that made everyone in the studio recoil, as if they had been physically struck. Her eyes blazed with an intensity that few had ever seen from the normally composed host. Let's talk about how you've spent years using your celebrity status to attack people who don't share your narrow worldview. That's real bullying, Robert. And frankly, I'm sick of watching entitled actors think they can school the rest of us. De Niro's eyes blazed with an intensity that his movie audiences knew well from his most memorable performances, but seeing it directed at a real person in real time was genuinely unsettling for everyone present. The muscles in his jaw worked as he processed the attack on his character. Entitled? You're calling me entitled while you sit here every day pontificating from your ivory tower, dismissing anyone who challenges your opinions as somehow morally inferior. The hypocrisy is absolutely staggering. Joy Behar attempted to inject some levity into the increasingly volatile situation with a nervous laugh and a comment about keeping things civil, but her effort fell completely flat as the two combatants ignored her entirely. The other panelists looked like deer caught in headlights, clearly out of their depth as the confrontation spiraled beyond anyone's ability to control or contain it. My ivory tower. Whoopi's laugh was harsh and mocking, echoing through the studio like broken glass. Her hands gestured wildly as her composure continued to deteriorate. I worked my way up from absolute nothing, performing in dingy clubs where people like you wouldn't even step foot. I've earned my place at this table through decades of hard work and genuine struggle, not because I memorized some lines and looked good on camera. The personal nature of the attacks was escalating rapidly, with both participants seemingly determined to inflict maximum psychological damage on the other's reputation and legacy. De Niro's face was flushed with anger as he processed what felt like a direct assault on his entire career and artistic integrity. The veins in his temples became visible as his blood pressure rose. Looked good on camera. De Niro's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper that somehow carried more menace than shouting ever could. The entire studio strained to hear his words. I've dedicated my entire life to my craft, studying with the best teachers, immersing myself completely in every role, transforming myself physically and emotionally. Meanwhile, you've turned political commentary into performance art, playing to the cheapest seats in the house. The audience was completely transfixed by the unprecedented display of hostility between two entertainment legends who had previously maintained professional respect for each other. Several people could be heard gasping audibly as the personal attacks became increasingly vicious and targeted, crossing lines that even heated political debates rarely breach. Whoopi moved closer to the guest area, her body language becoming more aggressive and intimidating with each step. The cameras captured her advancing like a predator stalking its prey. Performance art? At least I'm being authentic instead of hiding behind characters and pretending to be something I'm not. You've spent so long playing other people that I don't think you even know who Robert De Niro really is anymore. The psychological warfare was intensifying as both participants searched for the most devastating ways to undermine each other's sense of self and professional identity. De Niro stood his ground despite Whoopi's advancing proximity, his own body language becoming more defensive yet defiant. The space between them crackled with tension that seemed almost electrical. You want to see authentic? De Niro's voice carried decades of pent-up frustration about celebrity culture and political discourse. His hands shook slightly with the intensity of his emotions. Here's authentic. I'm tired of people like you who think having a television show gives you the right to tear down anyone who doesn't bow to your particular brand of righteousness. You've become everything you claim to fight against. Sarah Haynes made another desperate attempt to restore order by suggesting they take a commercial break and reset the conversation, but her voice was completely drowned out by the escalating confrontation. The show's producers were in full panic mode behind the scenes, unsure whether to intervene or let the drama continue for the sake of what would undoubtedly be record-breaking ratings. People like me? Whoopi's voice rose to a near shout, her professional composure completely shattered like glass hitting concrete. Her chest heaved with the effort of containing her rage. You mean people who actually stand for something instead of just complaining from the sidelines? At least I have the courage to put my real opinions out there instead of hiding behind vague artistic statements. The attack on his artistic integrity proved to be the final straw for De Niro. His legendary temper, which had been simmering throughout the exchange like lava beneath the Earth's surface, finally erupted with a force that shocked everyone in the studio. Vague artistic statements? My work speaks for itself, which is more than I can say for your daily circus of manufactured outrage and virtue signaling. The term virtue signaling hit Whoopi like a physical blow, her face contorting with rage as she absorbed what felt like the ultimate dismissal of her life's work and decades of activism. The other panelists watched in horror as their colleague prepared to unleash what everyone sensed would be the most devastating attack yet. The air in the studio seemed to vibrate with tension. Virtue signaling. Whoopi's voice was now at full volume, her professional composure completely abandoned like a mask thrown to the ground. You think fighting for civil rights and social justice is virtue signaling? You think using my platform to speak for people who don't have a voice is some kind of performance? How dare you minimize decades of real activism because you're uncomfortable with being challenged? The confrontation had reached a point where both participants seemed to have forgotten they were on live television, their personal animosity overwhelming any sense of professional decorum or public relations concerns. De Niro's response came with equal fury and conviction, his voice matching her volume. Real activism? You mean sitting behind a desk and lecturing people who disagree with you? That's not activism. That's self-righteous preaching to an echo chamber. Real change happens when people actually do something instead of just talking about it on television. The studio fell into complete silence as the weight of De Niro's words settled over everyone present like a heavy blanket. Whoopi's face went through a series of expressions, from shock to hurt to pure, unfiltered rage. The moment felt like a powder keg about to explode, with everyone sensing that the point of no return was rapidly approaching and there would be no going back. The silence in the studio was deafening as Whoopi's face transformed into something that none of her colleagues had ever seen before in their years of working together. Her eyes narrowed to dangerous slits, and when she spoke, her voice carried a cold fury that made everyone in the room feel genuinely uncomfortable and afraid of what might happen next. You want to lecture me about real activism? Whoopi's voice was dangerously quiet, each word dripping with contempt and years of suppressed anger. Let me tell you something about real work, Robert. While you were playing dress-up and winning awards for pretending to be other people, I was out there actually making a difference in people's lives. I've used my platform to change lives, to give voice to the voiceless, to fight battles that actually matter. What have you done besides complain and point fingers? De Niro's jaw clenched as he absorbed the full force of Whoopi's attack, his hands forming fists at his sides. The legendary actor had faced down intimidating directors and demanding roles throughout his career, but nothing had prepared him for this level of personal assault on live television. His response came with the full weight of his decades in Hollywood. What have I done? De Niro's voice rose to match Whoopi's intensity, his face reddening with indignation. I've dedicated my entire life to my craft, supporting causes I believe in without turning it into a daily performance. I don't need to broadcast every charitable act or political opinion to validate my existence. Some of us prefer substance over showboating. The word showboating hit Whoopi like a physical slap across the face. Her colleagues watched in horror as she stepped even closer to De Niro, her body language becoming increasingly threatening and unpredictable. The cameras captured every moment of the unprecedented meltdown as daytime television history was being made before everyone's eyes. Showboating. Whoopi's voice cracked with emotion and rage, the years of fighting for recognition and respect pouring out in a torrent of anger. You think standing up for what's right is showboating? You think fighting for justice every single day is some kind of performance? How dare you sit there in your privileged bubble and judge people who actually have the courage to take a stand? Duh. Niro refused to back down despite Whoopi's intimidating proximity and aggressive posturing. His own anger had reached a boiling point as he prepared to deliver what would become his most controversial television moment. Privileged bubble? You're the one living in a bubble, surrounded by people who tell you exactly what you want to hear. At least I live in the real world where actions speak louder than words. The exchange had devolved into a full-scale character assassination, with both participants seemingly determined to destroy each other's reputation in front of a live audience and millions of viewers at home. The other panelists sat frozen, completely helpless to stop the carnage unfolding before their eyes. Real world. Whoopi's laugh was bitter and harsh, echoing through the studio like the sound of breaking glass. The real world doesn't need another washed-up actor telling us how to think. The real world needs people who actually do the work instead of just criticizing from the sidelines. Maybe it's time you retired and let people who actually care take the spotlight. The personal nature of the attack, suggesting that De Niro was washed up and should retire, crossed a line that even the most heated television confrontations rarely breach. The legendary actor's face went through a range of emotions before settling on cold determination. His voice, when it came, was steady but filled with decades of accumulated frustration. Washed up, De Niro stood to his full height, his presence commanding despite the hostile environment that surrounded him. At least my legacy is based on actual achievement rather than just being loud and opinionated. I've created art that will outlast all of us, while you've turned meaningful discourse into cheap entertainment. The studio atmosphere had become toxic as both combatants prepared for what everyone sensed would be the final, devastating exchange. Whoopi's face was flushed with anger as she processed De Niro's dismissal of her life's work as cheap entertainment. The insult cut deep, striking at the heart of her professional identity. Cheap entertainment. Whoopi's voice reached a crescendo that made everyone in the studio wince and several audience members cover their ears. You know what's cheap? Coming on someone else's show and disrespecting the host who invited you. You know what's entertainment? Watching a so-called tough guy throw a tantrum because he can't handle being challenged by a strong woman. The gendered nature of Whoopi's attack added a new dimension to the confrontation, suggesting that De Niro's anger stemmed from sexism rather than legitimate disagreement. The accusation hung in the air like a toxic cloud as De Niro processed the implications of what she was suggesting about his character and motivations. A strong woman, De Niro's voice carried decades of frustration and anger, his self-control finally snapping completely. There's nothing strong about using your platform to bully guests and shut down opposing viewpoints. You've turned this show into your personal kingdom where anyone who disagrees gets attacked and humiliated. That's not strength, that's cowardice. The word cowardice proved to be the final straw for Whoopi. Her colleagues watched in stunned silence as she completely lost her composure, her professional mask slipping away to reveal raw, unfiltered rage that had been building for years. The transformation was shocking to witness. Cowardice. She screamed the word with such force that several audience members visibly recoiled in their seats. Get out. Get out of my studio right now. I don't have to sit here and listen to this. Disrespect from someone who thinks he's better than everyone else. You're done. Security. The dramatic call for security sent shockwaves through the studio as everyone realized the confrontation had reached its explosive conclusion. De Niro stood his ground for a moment, his eyes locked with Whoopi's in a final battle of wills that seemed to last forever but probably only lasted seconds. Fine, De Niro said with quiet dignity, his voice cutting through the chaos like a knife. I wouldn't want to stay where I'm not welcome anyway. But remember this moment, because you've just shown everyone exactly who you really are. With that devastating parting shot, the legendary actor carefully removed his microphone with deliberate precision and walked off the set with the measured pace of a man who refused to be rushed despite the hostile circumstances surrounding his exit. The cameras followed his departure as he disappeared backstage, leaving behind a studio in complete chaos and an audience in shocked silence. Whoopi remained standing at the center of the destruction, her chest heaving as she tried to regain her composure and process what had just occurred. The other panelists sat in stunned silence, clearly traumatized by what they had just witnessed and unsure how to proceed. The audience was equally shocked, many sitting with their mouths agape at the unprecedented display of hostility they had just observed. As the show cut to an emergency commercial break, the full weight of what had just transpired began to settle over everyone involved. The most explosive confrontation in daytime television history was over, but its impact would be felt for years to come. Whoopi had gotten her way, removing the guest who had dared to challenge her authority, but at what cost to her reputation and the show's credibility? The studio slowly began to empty as staff members and audience members tried to process the shocking events they had just witnessed, leaving behind only the lingering tension and the knowledge that television history had been made in the most dramatic and controversial way possible.